Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to begin in the 18th verse of the second chapter of First Peter. And this is a continuation of a previous lesson, so we already made it up to the 17th verse. We're just going to review here and now what we really need to know in order to make sense of what we're going to explain in the passage which comes after it. So the second verse reads, "As newborn infants, desire the unadulterated milk of the word, in order that you grow by it." So infants is a reference to spiritual maturity. So the people he was ministering to or writing to, if they were new to the faith, he just wanted them to feast on the milk of the word in order to grow by it, because we grow in grace and we grow spiritually in maturity, and the growing by grace is the key to it all. So we have to grow in knowledge and grow by grace, and that can only come from from developing the teeth fit for food that is harder. Then the fourth in the first sentence first clause of the fifth is, "Drawing near to him, a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by Yahweh and precious. You also, as living stones, are being built up in a spiritual house." So he's the living stone. He's the chief cornerstone. That's going to be what's communicated in after that. He references the Psalms, and there was a parable that the Master did in Matthew 21 and throughout the Synoptics, at least Luke, I'm sure, and perhaps even Mark, of the 10 the landowner who sent his servants, and they were repeatedly stoned, so he sent his own son, and he is the chief. He sent his own son, analogous to the one who came to suffer. And he was chosen to suffer, and that was precious to him. It is the precious blood of his suffering which purchases our salvation. And we are living stones because he is our living stone. So we are building bricks in the same foundation, in the same building. His cause is our cause when we call him our own. And then the 9th verse we read, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a sacred nation, a people for a possession, that you should proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." So he's speaking to the new covenant communities of the church. So this covenantal community is likened, like the nation of Israel, to a kingdom of priests. That means every member a minister, every member a missionary, and the reason we exist is to proclaim or preach the praises of the one who called us, who liberated us from sin and darkness and death and destruction and hell, to proclaim the marvelous light that he brings. So we exist as lighthouses and ministers in a dark and perverse generation. Then the 11th verse reads, "Beloved ones, I appeal to you as sojourners and pilgrims to abstain from fleshly lusts which battle against the soul." This kind of connects us to the first chapter, because he addresses them as the chosen ones and strangers and pilgrims and sojourners of this world. In other words, we will be strange to the world because we do not fit in, we do not reflect its values or ethos. So that's going to invite persecution. And he also mentions somewhere the lust which the Gentile nations were conditioned by upbringing to be enslaved by, that war against the soul. And then in the 13th verse we read, "Be subject to every institution of man because of the master, whether to the king as supreme, or to governors, as to those who are sent by him, for whom the punishment of doer of evil, and praise for those who do good, because such is the desire of Elohim." So he's preaching not unconditional obedience, but general obedience to the state and governing authorities in all matters that do not conflict with the worship and the values of Yahweh or Elohim. Then we are to obey them with everything within reason. This is more difficult if you're a slave in first century Rome, the Roman Empire, than it is today, but we'll try and address both context. And the closing verse of the passage, which comes before the one we're about to cover, is, "Respect all, love the brotherhood, fear Elohim, respect the king." So it all begins and ends in respect. If we respect all, we respect the officer, even if we cannot We will respect the office, even if we cannot respect the officer. And of course, we're to have total and unconditional and unbridled love for the brotherhood, the flock, the assembly, the covenantal community, and to fear Yahweh at all times, in all places, and with all our faculties and all their capacities. So the 18th verse reads, "Servants, be subject to your masters with all reverence, not only the good and gentle, but also to the crooked ones." So servants can mean one of two things. It can mean employees or slaves, and slavery was a fact of life in the ancient world all the way up until the pre-industrial world. Slavery is, there's a theological division over the issue itself. So both proponents of slavery could endorse their argument based on passages which appear to justify it, and the abolitionist has their cause. It was ultimately the equality that was established in the Messiah, through whom the ruler becomes enslaved and the slave becomes liberated, that set the manumission. And of course, being in the image of, made in the image of man, it gave us an automatic quality in the theologians of abolition. But, the challenge for slaves is sometimes they're at the mercy of slave masters who have total control and ownership of them, to be crooked and abusive and mean. And of course, if they had the good, some of the masters were good and gentle, and the slaves that got them were lucky that they did, even though they were unfortunate to be in slavery. They had the better of two worlds between those who got a crooked master. But Peter teaches that whether he is good or he is bad, you must respond with good. "For this is grace, if because of conscience towards Elohim anyone bears up under grief, suffering unrighteously." So this happens all the time. The righteous suffer unrighteously. We are innocent of the retribution which is inflicted upon us, and this is a fact of life in all the centuries of Christianity. But he considers it a grace to have the conscientious outlook that when we are suffering for the name, we are suffering with and for the Messiah, who suffered so willingly with us, whose approach to an outlook and the outcome of his suffering leads on to sanctification. And that is the main thing I've been stressing the whole book of 1 Peter is all about lately, is that it is the path of suffering unto sanctification. "For what credit is there in enduring and beating when you sin? But if you suffer for doing good, and you endure, this is grace with Elohim." So this does not give Christians an automatic license to disobey whichever laws they like, and consider the blows they receive as sacrifices and sweet swelling aromas that rise up to heavens. We are not becoming martyrs when we invite disrespect or retribution because of our own sin. So as Christians, we are to be separate from the world, because their sinful influence will come it. But what good is for us or them if we are the sinful influence? And so there is a difference between suffering for doing good and suffering for doing wrong, and that is key and critical in the assessment of its value. "For to this you were called, because Messiah also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps." So in all things and in all ways and in all circumstances and in all contexts, the Messiah is our example. We are his disciples. He is the model that we aspire to, and he is the one in whose name and whose power we do the things we do. Apart from him, we are nothing, and in order to belong to him, we must belong in the fellowship of suffering, which unites us not only to the Messiah, but the suffering that was inflicted for his name's sake, not only in this generation, but all generations, all human history, where the fellowship is not limited to any one world at any given time. So the steps that he followed are the ones that we must follow, and he did it all as an example for us. And Peter lays on the line what the atonement and the cross and the crucifixion is all about. "Who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth." So he was sinless, yet he bore our sin penalty. He was born without sin, he lived without sin, and he died without sin. And because he was killed for the sin he never was. The Jewish people and the Romans who executed them at their behest thought they were killing him for a crime, the Jews for a sin, that of blasphemy, but he was dying not for his own sin, but for the sin of all humanity, past, present, and future, now and forever and eternal. And he had complete integrity. He was honest. He did not retaliate verbally when they were mocking him and spitting him and dragging him through a kangaroo court to wait his impending crucifixion, which he knew he had to do. He was aware of the fact his hour was always on his mind throughout his ministry. Who being reviled did not revile in return, suffering did not threaten, but committed to him who judges righteously. So even though he was abused and untreated and misunderstood, he did not reciprocate the same discourtesies. He did not retaliate or verbally or physically. He could have summoned a legion of 10,000 of angels to protect him and be at his beck and call and disposal to diminish the temple guards and the Roman military men who had came to arrest him and tie him on the cross. But he was committed to the one who judges righteously, so he knew he was being misjudged, misunderstood, maltreated, abused, and he was suffering. He was innocent, yet he was suffering for sin, not only the sin all around him, but the sin from the beginning of time. So a lot transpired on this cross. This is the crucial, decisive battle in our warfare, and the warfare which exists between the cosmic struggle of good and evil personified by Elohim and Satan, respectively. Who himself bore our sins in his bodies on the timber, so that we, having died to sin, might live unto righteousness, by whose stripes you were healed. So he bore our sins. He became our sin penalty. He was born without sin. He lived without sin, and he died without sin. Yet he became the sin punishment. He bore the retribution we are all due, for we are all sinners, and he was sinless. And what he did was lay his body on the cross to be given up. So he was exalted because he was uplifted on the cross, and because he was exalted, we too may be uplifted into exaltation. And he died to sin, so that sinners who must otherwise incur the righteous response to their sin, the wages of sin is death and hell, and death and destruction and judgment and eternal solitude in a disembodied existence. So we want to live unto righteousness. His righteousness becomes our righteousness. It is the vicarious atonement. That means someone assumes it for someone else who benefits via proxy. So he paid the penalty. He did what he alone was called to endure, what he alone was constitutionally capable of. And it must have really broken his heart to be estranged from the Father at the most excruciating moment of all on the cross, when he said, my Elohim, why hast thou forsaken me? But it is by his stripes we are healed. So this is a citation of Isaiah 53:5, and then what comes after it is 53:6. So this is the suffering servant passage, which explains the meaning of the vicarious atonement. So by his stripes, the whips that he endured, the nails that went into his hands, the spear which went into his side, we are healed. There is medicinal quality in the pain he bore, which is sufficient for all of our sicknesses, be it sins, any other variety or component of evil. For you are like sheep going astray, but now having returned to the shepherd and the overseer of your souls. So this is Isaiah 53:6. We are sheep. We are naturally wayward creatures, prone to go our own way, do our own thing, and there is a way which seems right unto man, but the end thereof is death. We read in Proverbs 14:12. But that's the way we would do if we followed the wayward sheep mentality. But once we find our shepherd, we heed his beck and call, we bask in his presence and power and protection, and our shepherd is none other than the good shepherd himself, the uniquely good one, who is the overseer or bishop of our souls. And to oversee our soul is to make sure that lands in heaven, so we can have fellowship and company with him. So he is a shepherd which endeavors to gather the flock and unite them under his presence, under his power, under his goodness, under his grace, and for all eternity. So I hope that's the reason you're here. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.